Morning. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Our next presenter is Amy Montgomery from Health Canada. She's going to be speaking on wastewater and public health.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Thunder Bay. So my name is Amy Montgomery, and I'm the Senior Environmental Health Officer for Health Canada. I've been with Health Canada for 8 years. Prior to being senior, I traveled to 8 First Nation communities and provided public health programming. And prior to being with Health Canada, I actually worked as a public health inspector for the city of Thunder Bay. So that's the experience that I came to the table with. Today we're going to talk a bit about wastewater and public health. And it's going to be quite a broad sort of overview. We're not going to get into too much technical detail, but sort of what our role within Health Canada is working with the communities. There has been some changes, some new legislation has come down. So Environment Canada has been communicating things to the communities, and I'm just going to try to help orient people through what our role is continuing, even though this new legislation is in place. So I'll just briefly talk a bit about the program. So again, it's environmental public health. So our program specifically looks at conditions in the environment, whether natural or human built, and how this can affect a person or a community's ability to achieve and maintain good health. As environmental health program, we try to prevent and identify environmental public health risks that could impact the health of your community. It is also recommending corrective action to reduce these risks. So we don't have authority, we just come to Chief and Council and we provide recommendations. In support of our mission, Health Canada's mission, it's to help the people of Canada maintain and improve their health. And our program provides services to First Nation communities south of 60 degrees. So the role of an environmental health officer, we provide advice, guidance, education, public health inspections, recommendations to communities and leadership to help them manage the risks associated with the environment. We gather data required to analyze what steps can be taken to promote public health. Some environmental health officers in Canada are employed by Health Canada, and some are employed by tribal councils, so they may be a transferred program. We do have a couple, actually one fully transferred in Ontario, but a lot of other regions in Canada do have the program transferred. We are all certified public health inspectors of Canada, so we had to take specific training within I think there's 5 universities now in Canada that you can take that training. And you have to do some practical training in order to receive your certification. And you go through a board and do some testing and write reports and things like that. So I like to promote our career within the communities. If you know of any young people that are interested in science or health, you know, I would certainly encourage you to tell them to give me a call. Our environmental health officers would be happy to go out with a young person in the community and kind of show them the work that we do to try and encourage First Nations people from entering this field. So our regional organization, we have right now a split, we split the region or the province into 4 areas, and each area is managed by a senior environmental health officer. We do have a regional manager who's in Brantford. Each office has environmental health officers, and they're assigned specific communities that they provide these services to. So I'm in Thunder Bay. I have 4 EHOs that work under me. In Kenora, we have Whitney Roos. Do we have any Kenora people here today? Kenora area communities? Okay, so you guys have met Whitney, all right? And Fort Francis community area, we have a few in the room. Great, so John Steele was the environmental health officer in your area, and he's actually off sick right now, but we have recently brought on Lindsay McDonald. So if you haven't met her, certainly give her a call in the office and introduce yourself. She's just started traveling to the communities within the last month and a half or so. And in Thunder Bay, we have some Thunder Bay area communities. So going to the east, I see a few familiar faces. So we have Mark Johnston and Kevin Lundstrom. So I'm sure that you've met. And Mark worked the booth with me yesterday. So anyone, I see some faces that popped in at the booth and had a look at our big draw bed bugs. So that was Mark that you were talking to, or myself. So here's just a brief look at the map. They just color coded the sort of separations of the zones they're called right now. We're set up in a zone framework. So again, I talked about our program does not have any authority. Our environmental health officers can't go into community and say, you shall do this, you must do that. Our program works or is funded through First Nations and Inuit Health, and it's based on discretionary government policy. And essentially, we have to provide these mandatory programs. So it's funded or delivered pursuant to the National Framework for Environmental Public Health Program, First Nation Community South of 60. So that is a manual that we're provided by our headquarters, and within that manual it breaks down the 8 programs that I'll go over quickly, and within those programs there's certain things that we are required to do at the request of the communities and in cooperation with the communities. And even though we don't have authority, we still have a duty of care. So I am responsible for the recommendations that I make to a community. And we can be held liable if we make incorrect recommendations or make a mistake. And as a certified public health inspector, I also have to follow the code of ethics. So we could lose our certification if we fail to follow those code of ethics. So the next slide, I have the 8 core programs, and each program consists of 3 aspects. So we have the inspection aspect, we have the training aspect, and public education. And so what we try to do is work with each community individually. Everyone has priorities that are different. Everybody has different areas that they maybe are focusing on within that year, or projects or infrastructure that they may be looking at developing. So again, we try to work with the community and say, what are your needs? What would you like us to do? Where can we help you? So these are the 8 core programs. Probably our most known program is drinking water. So we work with the community water plant operators and monitor drinking water, chemical sampling, biological sampling, that sort of thing. We also do food safety programming. So if a community has a restaurant or a hospital or a daycare and they would like us to inspect their food services, we can do that, and we make recommendations and we base them on the regulations in Ontario. So we always want to go with the most stringent or the most protective guideline or recommendation when we provide those to the community. So we want food served at the same level off reserve, so we would give you the tools and the training to help support. We do food safety training and those sorts of things at no cost. So a lot of times people are paying $100 for a course that we can provide you for free. So it's a great program, the food safety program. Health and housing. Today, wastewater does fall within housing because we have on-site or individual septic systems that we may be a part of. Wastewater, takes more into account sewage, large community treatment systems. So that's what we're going to focus on today is wastewater. We also do solid waste inspections, and we sit on committees or planning groups if you're looking at upgrading or changing. Inspections of any facility in the community, public buildings, schools, daycares, communicable disease control. So we work closely with the community health representatives, community health nurses. We monitor illness. If there's large numbers of people with the same symptoms, then we're all behind the scenes working with the community health people, trying to find out, is there a connection? Is there an outbreak? What do we need to look at? Do we need to do some extra sampling? Were people all at an event together? So those are the sorts of works we would do in communicable disease control. We would also do rabies investigation. So if anyone in the community is bit by a dog or a cat or a fox or any other wild or domestic animal, we would follow up and just ensure the animal is safe and healthy. And we usually ask people to confine it at home for a period of 10 days so that we can verify the animal does not have the rabies virus. And even though rabies is not common in our area, we have had a community with a positive puppy within the last 2 years. So it is out there. Oops, I took some ice by accident. So wastewater is also known as sewage, and we know that it can be harmful to humans, and it's also capable of spreading diseases and polluting surface and groundwater sources. So this is definitely something that we always try to keep an eye on and work closely with the communities and encourage them to let us know when they're having problems or having emergencies so that we can, advocate and support the community and try to get it resolved as fast as possible so that we don't end up having contamination of drinking water supplies, for example, or your recreational beaches, things of that nature. Our program identifies existing or potential hazards associated with wastewater disposal, and we try to reduce those public health risks to the community. So again, our program focuses on the wastewater treatments, the large community plants, as well as the individual on-site sewage disposal systems. So before I go into it a little bit, I'm just wondering, I just kind of want to gauge my audience today. How many are operators in wastewater in the room? So how many have wastewater kind of under their portfolio as a counselor, for example, or you're a manager, operations manager, so lots of managers, and then a lot of housing? Okay, and how many are in a remote fly-in community? And how many road access? Okay, so we have a nice good split, so we're going to be able to share some experiences together. I'm hoping that if you have some stories along the way, whether positive or negative, some lessons that you learned in your community, I would love to hear your story. I have some prizes maybe if you'd like to share. So what is wastewater? Essentially, it's a whole lot of water which has been contaminated with things through households or industrial or business. And we would be looking at obviously human waste, food waste, and chemical waste. So human waste, I don't think I have to give you an example of that. Food waste would just be things that end up going down sinks or not getting caught in traps and that sort of thing, and they maybe end up in your treatment system or your community plant. And then what's an example of a chemical waste? Does anyone have an example of a chemical waste that would end up in a sewage system or a community treatment plant? Okay. Cleaning supplies, perfect. So just domestic cleaning, right? Does anyone have an auntie or grandma that likes to use bleach? So anytime we use chemicals of that nature, they end up within our treatment systems. Can someone else think of another chemical waste? Pardon me? Drano, yeah. Drano's another example of like a domestic household waste. What about something that's not over-the-counter cleaning supply? So what else could you potentially be flushing down your toilet or down the sink? Oil and waste, yeah. Hazardous chemicals maybe sometimes get spilt, and maybe it's not even down the drain. Maybe it ends up going down a sanitary sewer in the community. Excellent example. One more example. It's something that maybe we take to make us healthy. And there's a lot of talk about proper disposal of these little itty-bitty things. Medication, thank you. So pharmaceuticals, right? It's something that you hear more and more about. There's been a lot of articles lately about the Great Lakes being contaminated with these little beads that come from facial washes, or women's facial scrubs or washes. So little plastic beads are showing up in our lakes and streams. Also, any type of pharmaceutical. So if you have a drug that's, you don't have to use anymore, your prescription's been changed, for example, you want to try to encourage community members to not be flushing those drugs because you can bring them back to the pharmacy for free and they will properly dispose of them for you. So again, wastewater is referred to as sewage as well, which is probably the more common term. And why is it beneficial? Well, I think we all understand, everyone in the room understands the importance of protecting our watersheds, our source water. So not only the water on the surface, your streams, your lakes, your oceans, but we're also worried about the water underground, specifically for communities that are drawing groundwater for drinking water. So we need to protect all of those things. We also need to prevent communicable diseases. If we have sewage ending up in your drinking water, whether it's from your community or a community up the river, that can kill somebody. So it's essential that we keep those separate. And protection of recreational water areas. So not only is it not fun to wade in raw sewage, But that sewage changes the lakes, it changes the systems, it negatively impacts them, and then you have problems like algae and weeds and problems with the fish and the aquatic population within the lake. So all of those things can be adversely or negatively impacted by wastewater not being treated properly or by raw wastewater ending up in those systems. And then another positive thing that I see in the community, it's employment opportunity. Anytime things are managed at the community level, that's more opportunity for someone in the community to have a role working in those areas. So what is it composed of? The majority of it is water from showering and from doing dishes, the washing machine. There is a small amount of solid waste, which we know is a number 2, right? Number 1, number 2. There's lots of number 2 in there. Also, we have, again, number 2, or feces, is composed of organic. So anything that's natural has carbon-based molecules in it, and that causes it to be called organic. So something like a vegetable peel, a carrot peel, would be considered a vegetable origin, obviously, and it's an organic material, and then the same thing, feces is considered organic material as well. Because they are organic, the solid waste products will eventually decay and decompose, I apologize. So that will happen if things are maintained properly, built properly at the beginning, installed properly according to the either requirements of the sewage system itself, whether you're using an eco-flow system or just a pipe system. Your wastewater system will have all kinds of documents from the engineers that tell you what the appropriate processes are, how things should operate, what the parameters are, and if we are unable to meet those, whether it's funding, not having the funding to fix things, not having the trained operators, not having enough operators, and that's something we see a lot. The organic material needs to be converted to a form which will not cause the spread of disease or pollute water. So the whole point of treating this is to prevent contamination and pollution. It also contains bacteria, and not just a few bacteria, but billions and billions and billions. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. Some of them may be what we call pathogenous, which means that it can cause disease in a human. But the majority of the bacteria in these systems are not harmless, and they're actually needed. We need to have these bacteria do their work and break down this organic material to make it safe. So inside our fields, inside our tanks, there's biological processes happening. These wonderful bacteria are doing their job, and they're helping break it down. And it's the basis of really any biological treatment. Can anyone give me an example of a bad bacteria that we do not want in our drinking water? Put our arm up. So I just want to be fair. First arms, right? Okay, what's your example? Perfect. So E. coli, everyone I think in this room has heard of E. coli hundreds of times, probably. The reason it's so popular is because it causes illness and death in people. And we saw some really horrible things go down in Walkerton, Ontario a few years ago, where people were not following the process of water treatment appropriately and making a lot of mistakes and ending up in jail because they didn't do what they were supposed to do. So E. coli is one of the bacteria that we're concerned about ending up in your drinking water or ending up in your recreational water. Can anyone give me an example of a virus from a human that could be in that wastewater? Think about diarrhea. Lots of diarrhea, jaundice maybe. There's 3 forms of this virus, and only one of them gives you diarrhea. The other 2 are blood-borne infections. Begins with an H. There we go, hepatitis A. So not everybody carries hepatitis A, only people that are sick do, but that's one of the ones that we're worried about. We don't want viruses from humans ending up in drinking water that you can ingest and that will cause you to be sick. So those are 2 great examples. So again, there is the potential for anybody working with sewage to get sick. So if you have employees that are snaking drains and climbing in sludge, they can potentially become sick from the things that they're touching. So again, viruses and the bacteria, which mainly come from the guts of humans and animals, if not treated in that sewage, and if it gets out into the drinking water or the groundwater sources, then you can end up getting people in the community sick, or the guys that are working in that site. The most serious viral risk, like I said, is hepatitis, and then the other most serious bacterial risk is tetanus. And everyone knows that you should have your tetanus shot every 10 years. Has everybody had theirs redone? Especially for anyone who's working in any capacity where you're going to cut yourself on something. So any construction or maintenance guys, you should all really make sure that your staff have their tetanus up to date. Tetanus is something that you can't stop once it comes, right? It's very uncommon now, but it's there. So we know when you get a cut and you go get stitches, you're getting a tetanus shot if you haven't had one. How many here have had to have that done? We got a few. It's okay, we all end up with a little nick or cut at some point. So just something sort of to think about, and we'll talk about occupational health of the workers and the community near the end as well. So unfortunately, the main route of exposure of getting these bacteria or viruses that are from people's feces is hand to mouth. So the only way that you're going to get sick is if somehow it gets in your mouth. So if you're handling something and then you go eat your lunch, or you have a cigarette and you forgot to wash your hands, then you potentially are infecting yourself that way. So just, again, having hand sanitizer or a cleanup area for them to wash their hands, that would really reduce the risk for the workers. The other thing is less common. It's you could potentially breathe it in, and like I said, if you're snaking a drain or something and it's causing it to aerosolize and spray in the air, and I'm sure there's people in the room who've had stuff splash up in their face at work. So you want to protect yourself that way. You don't want to get any of that in your mucous membranes, your eyes, your mouth, or your nose. So just another sort of risk to kind of be cautious of. How do they enter your body? Again, I mentioned smoking, eating, drinking by taking your hand and putting it to your mouth, wiping your face with contaminated hands or gloves, or by licking splashes from the skin. I don't know why they have licking splashes. This was from like an occupational health resource I'd looked at, and I thought, who licks like a splash off their, but you never know, I guess things happen, right? Skin contact, so through cuts, scratches, or penetrating wounds. A lot of the larger plants, there is the risk of needles and things of that nature. I know most communities have lagoons or small individual systems. We have few communities with RBCs. So those larger systems potentially could have things put in the drain. So if you're, again, having to do maintenance and walking around in raw sewage and sludge, that is a real risk. You could get a needle stick. Garbage guys, anybody handling waste that way could be at risk that way. We talked about aerosols, so snaking or any sort of action that would cause it to spray. And then by breathing them in either as an aerosol or a mist. So who is at risk? Employees involved in inspection and maintenance work. You also have the construction workers or maintenance workers in the community who repair or replace them. If anybody's ever been involved in a spill cleanup, maybe you have something backing up, or you have a lift station that's spilling out and they're pumping it and trying to clean it up before it gets to a lake, for example. And plumbers. So all of these people are at risk of exposure while working in wastewater treatment. Chemical hazards. So we know there is biological hazards, but we have to remember that working in these types of circumstances can cause us to be in a space that's deficient of oxygen, meaning there's not enough oxygen there to make it safe. And I really want to push this, because make it an important point to talk about today, because I see a lot of people hanging their heads in septic tanks. It's really common, and I think people just get complacent and they forget that just putting your head in there could become a fatality. And never ask your workers to go into a tank or any sort of confined space unless they have the training and the buddy system. And a lot of the tribal councils should be able to refer you to those types of training. There's a lot of organizations that offer it. So definitely that should be something that is a big priority for any staff doing this type of work. And don't climb in septic tanks. And don't hang your body in a septic tank. And we've seen it. I saw my dad do it as a kid. So we know, people, when it's, 20 below and you want to get that thing going, you're going to do what it takes, but it's not worth it. The other risks would be flammable gases, so methane and toxic gases like carbon monoxide, which again just takes away the oxygen. We've all heard of carbon monoxide in our homes, and we have to use the carbon monoxide detectors. So these types of gases could be present. And then again, if you have a generator or pumps going, then you have the exhaust gases from these types of things that could potentially be a risk for you now. So you're bringing another risk in that you're working with. So types of wastewater systems, how many have on-site systems in their community here? So septic systems. Lots? And what about larger community plants? So like a lagoon or an RBC? So we have a few. Good, so we have a nice mix of people. So we deal a lot with individual systems. Even communities that have a lagoon, a lot of them have individual septic sites as well. So we have communities that have both. We have communities that maybe have one or the other. Individual systems are also called sewage systems or on-site or septic systems. There's all sorts of terminology that people use. Essentially, it's in your backyard, it's on-site, and it's eliminating the need for municipal sewers. It's comprised of a tank, piping, and billions of organisms that process the waste. And that's a simple sort of overlook at septic fields. I have a little video that we're going to watch. This is a new resource. Has anyone seen the Septic Smart resources? So this was developed, I think it was 2 years ago, by the Ministry of Agriculture, Ministry of Environment's involved, Health Canada's involved, and the Ontario government. And essentially it's a understanding your septic system book. And it's a really good educational resource for your community members. I think that we've all pulled things out of fields that shouldn't have been there. I've seen all kinds of stuff go into septic tanks that shouldn't have been there. Do you guys agree? Seen some crazy stuff come out of them? Yeah? Toys, jewelry, women's products, condoms, all sorts of things that shouldn't have been put down that were put down. Just an error. And it's just people don't know. They don't know why they shouldn't put it down. But if we can help educate and show them why it's important to protect the bacteria in the system, then we're going to have less failures. The other important thing about educating your homeowners, if they know how to run their system and not clog it up, and they know that they should not do all their laundry on Sunday and all their laundry on Sunday, they should try to spread out water usage. What does that mean for you? Less problems, right? Less failures, less work. If we have functioning systems, then we don't have to worry about them. It's very little maintenance. It's, maybe an annual walk through people's backyard just to see if you see signs of failure. But otherwise, I think that the education piece is awesome. So these you can find. You just Google Septic Smart. I have a bunch of them today you can take. And they also have the videos that I was giving out, and we're going to watch today. So again, like if you ever have like a public health fair or something like that, you could play these videos and people can just watch them as they walk by, and they're a really nice resource. So we're just going to watch them. They're only, we'll watch the first 3, and it's about 8 minutes, 10 minutes.
If you live in a rural area, in or near a smaller community, or have a cottage, chances are you have a septic system. Septic systems are used to treat household wastes when a connection to a municipal sewage system is not available. These systems are on-site because they are intended to treat wastewater where it is actually generated. Anything that goes down the drain, every drop from your shower and every flush of your toilet, flows out through the septic system. Typically, a septic system consists of a storage tank, a network of pipes, and billions of microorganisms inside the tank that help process your waste. Most rural homes have what's defined under the Ontario Building Code as a Class 4 septic system, that is, a septic tank, along with a leaching bed or a filter bed, all buried beneath the soil.
Basically, the idea is to treat the wastewater, first of all, typically through a septic tank. And the septic tank will settle some of the solids out, provide a little bit of the treatment, and then we would send the effluent to some kind of soil absorption system, or sometimes called a leaching bed, where we would further treat the effluent and then allow it to trickle into the soil.
The waste flows to the first compartment of the tank where the heavy solids settle, and the lighter materials, fats, oils, and greases float to the top as scum. Baffles and screens keep this scum layer from flowing out to the leaching bed. The scum is removed when the tank is pumped out during regular maintenance. A small amount of fine organic particles may settle in the second compartment of the tank, where almost all of what's left breaks down. In systems built or upgraded after 2006, an effluent filter is required to trap and help decompose any remaining particles before they get to the leaching bed. The leaching bed is made up of a network of perforated polyvinyl chloride drain pipes. These PVC pipes disperse the effluent, allowing the liquid to seep into the ground where the bacteria and other organisms continue to break it down, and where it is further filtered by the stone and sand that surround these pipes and the soil below. The Ontario Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs is a key partner in researching effective septic systems, and the ministry facilitates collaboration among many leading organizations and stakeholders with an interest in Ontario's water resources, including the Ministries of the Environment and Municipal Affairs and Housing, Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, and others. What kind of septic tank do you have? It may seem strange to some people, but there are in fact some homeowners who may not even know they have a septic tank.
Something that we hear all the time is somebody moves from a metropolitan area and moves to the country, maybe because they bought a cottage or maybe they're retiring, and somewhere down the road we hear them say, "I never knew I had a septic system at my new property." And they usually say that when they have a problem.
But unlike a sewage system in the city, keeping a septic system well maintained is the homeowner's responsibility. And it's a good idea for a number of important reasons: to protect your health, your investment, and the environment. There are many contaminants in wastewater that can directly affect your health, including bacteria, viruses, parasites, and nitrates. If any of these contaminants reach your drinking water supply, they can cause diseases and other health and environmental problems. But the good news is, there really isn't that much to know about taking care of your septic system and how to avoid problems in the first place.
For a conventional system, a maintenance for a septic system primarily involves having the tank pumped out when the solids reach a level where it's not going to function properly. Typically, we say that's when the tank is 1/3 full, and that might happen every 3 years or every 5 years, depending on the kind of use.
The cost to pump out the tank can range from $150 to $350, depending on how far the material has to be trucked for disposal. But of course, that's a lot cheaper than replacing the whole system.
Your septic system may have a value of somewhere between $10,000 or $25,000. If you take care of it, it will last 25 years, 30 years, maybe even longer. The analogy I like to use is like maintaining your car. We all don't hesitate to have the oil changed in our car or do the routine tune-ups, and we do that so our car will last a long time. And the same thing is true for a septic system. If we pump our tank out regularly, our leaching bed will last a lot longer than if we never pump it out at all.
Besides pumping out the system, it's also important to clean the effluent filter, which is now a required feature of every septic system under the 2006 Building Code.
These are two examples of popular effluent filters that are used. This one here has a serpentine type filter on it, and so the sewage has to wind its way through this filter before it exits out the septic tank. As you can see, this is easy to remove, so it can be cleaned once a year as required. This is another example, slightly different design, but the same idea. It's got a fine slots the sewage has to make its way through, and it will filter out the fine particles. And like the other one, it's easy to remove, easy to clean, and slides back in to go back into service fairly easily.
Another really important part of septic system maintenance, and one you may not think of, is keeping trees and shrubs from growing too close.
Now, this is an old style pipe, so this is a clay tile that we don't use anymore, but you can see that it's jammed full of roots, and these roots come from a cedar tree in this case, which was planted too close to the leaching bed. And since cedar trees love water, and leaching beds have lots of water, they all go to the leaching bed.
And did you know that water conservation is good for your septic system as well?
Water conservation is important for any system operation, principally because the less water we put through our septic system, the better it will work.
Efficient water use improves the bacterial action of the septic system and helps reduce the risk of failure. So that means doing full loads of laundry and dishes instead of half loads, using low flow shower heads and low flush or dual flush toilets. And never put the wrong things down the toilet. Things like expired pharmaceuticals and antibiotics or other chemical pollutants.
Clearly things like paint or solvents or gasoline or oils, our systems are not designed to treat that, so as part of maintenance and part of operation, we've got to make sure we're not putting the wrong things down the system.
Septic system technology has been constantly improving all around the world, and Canadian companies in particular are continually developing new on-site technologies. Research at the Ontario Rural Wastewater Centre at the University of Guelph plays an important role in developing, assessing, and providing training and demonstrations of many of these new technologies. For one thing, septic tanks have certainly gotten a lot better. In the past, steel tanks, cinder block tanks, or poured-in-place concrete tanks were used. Today, septic tanks are either prefabricated concrete or plastic or fiberglass, making installations and replacement much easier.
The concrete we use is much more corrosion resistant, so we don't see nearly as much concrete corrosion that we might have seen 25 years ago. We used to use steel tanks. We don't use those anymore because they're known to corrode and corrode quite quickly. Plastic septic tanks, which we only saw a little bit 25 years ago, we're seeing much more now. The plastics are much stronger, a lot more robust than they were to begin with. And plastic septic tanks provide an advantage. They're much lighter and easier to work with.
Similarly, years ago, leaching beds were made with clay tiles and asbestos pipe. Not only have those materials been replaced with plastic pipes, but alternative technologies have become more readily available to homeowners, providing practical solutions for sewage treatment in different soil conditions, sensitive and remote locations, or where conventional systems may not be appropriate.
Advanced treatment technologies all have one characteristic which is common to all of them, and that is that they provide more oxygen to the sewage, which allows it to be treated more before it gets to the ground.
Some of the new, approved technologies, including aerobic treatment units and media filters, are sometimes capable of producing an effluent of the same quality or even better than some large municipal treatment plants.
The wastewater would come out of the septic tank and then come into a treatment tank, such as you see here in this blue tank here. And inside this treatment tank is a media, this plastic media that I have here in my hand. And this plastic media would be inside the water, and a biofilm would grow on top of that media. And then air is pumped in, which surrounds that media, and that creates the treatment process, which will break down the wastewater before it gets returned to the environment. This technology uses peat as a filter media, and this is an example of some of the peat. It's not the kind of peat that you would buy at your garden store, but specially manufactured peat just for the treatment of wastewater.
And there are alternatives when it comes to laying out the leaching bed as well.
These are two examples of products that are used throughout the province to replace gravel conventionally seen in on-site systems. The first one here is an example of a chamber system, and this plastic chamber would go into a trench dug in the soil absorption system area, and the effluent would be pumped into or gravity fed into the upstream end here and flow along the bottom of the trench underneath the chamber. This product over here is polystyrene beads, which are surrounding a piece of drainage pipe and then wrapped in a netting to keep it all together. And that looks, in fact, somewhat like gravel and pipe, except the gravel has been replaced by these polystyrene beads.
One of the requirements under the Ontario Building Code governing some of these alternative technologies is that you have a regular maintenance contract.
And what that means is that once every 6 months, once every year, a maintenance provider will come out and make a check of your system. Sometimes they may take a sample to see how well it's working. Sometimes they will just review to make sure that any pumps or blowers or filter media is working properly.
That can mean an additional cost of another $150 to $250 a year. Your local on-site sewage system professional can help you select the right technology for your site. And your local conservation authority or municipality can tell you about any cost-sharing programs that may be available.
Okay, so has anybody been to the Ontario Rural Wastewater Centre? That was where the doctor was doing his video from. And within that facility, it's actually a phenomenal training center. I had the opportunity to go there. And it's a big, like you saw, the big plastic garage, probably 2 or 3 times the size of this room. And they have every type of technology there. So if you're interested in actually looking and feeling, because I know a lot of people that are installers or you're responsible for these types of systems in your community, you want to know what technologies are out there and how do they work, and they have all the different types of tanks and it's all a hands-on experience. So I find a lot of time in training it's out of books and out of codes, and it's not fun sometimes to just sit and listen and read. So when you actually can get out there and they have examples of problems, real life scenarios, it helps to enhance your learning experience, I think. So I'm not going to get in a lot today about the installation of sewage systems or about troubleshooting or technologies, because there is a presentation this afternoon after lunch. It's Phil Tangi from Bomose Tribal Council. So he's going to be doing a really good in-depth presentation with all the nitty-gritty about installation and the classes of sewage systems. So that will be a good presentation if you're really interested in the detail. So another thing about those videos is, like I said, they're free and they're a great tool for learning. We are, we are always advocating. We're getting a lot of new resources from our headquarters that are more culturally appropriate, and I know that our headquarters office right now is working on some fact sheets. So I'm excited to see those types of materials so that we can use, materials that are more applicable to First Nations and that maybe address some of the issues that are different in your communities than an off-reserve community. I know it's interesting how they talk about when you have to pick the technology, it's going to really be dependent on your community, the site itself. What's the soil like? Where are you located? Are you flying all these things in? Are you bringing them on winter roads? So I'm guessing weight comes into play a lot when you're looking at what it is you're using. So there's all kinds of technology out there. It just takes a bit of research and a bit of community history and understanding of what your soils and what type of technology you've used before that worked well or didn't work well. So what do we do at Health Canada with regards to septic systems? It's hard, I know. I'm trying to hold it over so everyone can hear me better. So we do provide site and installation inspections for new or expanding or existing systems. We'll also come and help you troubleshoot if necessary, if you're having problems to try and determine what's going on with the field. We provide advice, guidance, and recommendations relating to the fields and information on decommissioning. So for example, decommissioning a site, one of the biggest things I think about and recommend is removal of the old tanks. How many of you have seen a barrel buried in the ground? I live in rural Thunder Bay. I mean, I have friends that are, replacing fields and they're finding that it was like an old barrel, like metal barrel in their backyard. So you really want to think, do you want that barrel in there, or do you want a corroded old tank that potentially a bunch of children could be playing on and fall through? So it really could be dangerous. It's just like old fridges and things like that. You want to make sure that you destroy the tanks and pull them out and make them so that people can't go in them and can't access them, or in 5 years fall through and like an old well or something. So those are kind of an example of decommissioning recommendations we would give. Anytime there's a complaint or a request from the community, we would try to attend and help you that way. And again, reviewing plans. So in the video, they talked a lot about the Ontario Building Code, and again, I mean, it's up to the community the standard that you want your fields to go to. But you know, most tribal councils, Health Canada, we recommend following the Ontario Building Code. It's very stringent. You know, it's been tested many times over, and we definitely recommend compliance with the installation and operation under that code. We also recommend that you have a licensed installer. So a lot of communities don't. You have people that within the community that have done it for 25 years and have tons of experience, and they've just never got their BCIN. So again, this is up to chief and council to decide what are we going to do? Are we going to use our own people? Are we going to train them and get them BCIN numbers? Or are we going to use off-site contractors? It's really the decision of the community, and you have so many factors to consider. But when it comes to failures and liability and all those sorts of things, you know, you want to protect your community as well, because they're big investments. 25, 30 grand, I would guess if you have to fly that in, I can't even imagine the cost of one field sometimes in a remote community. So again, it's, you know, you want to try to protect yourself as much as you can off the get-go. So our EHOs will review plans and applications for homes or other community buildings. There's just an example of a site plan. In the old days, we used to help design, and unfortunately, you know, if we're going to take on the inspector role, then it's probably not a good idea for us to design as well. Because my designs are always right. No? So again, we try to encourage the community to fill out the application with their contractor. If they don't have a contractor in the community, then whoever is doing the work in the community, you know, we can help you sort of fill that out and make sure all the pieces are there. But we can't design your field or say to you, you have to use EcoFlow. You know, we can't specifically give you a brand, for example, but looking at your soils analysis and things like that, we can certainly give you a few options that maybe would be a good option to go with. But again, I mean, I've worked with communities, and they have guys that have been installing for 25 years, and they know their stuff, and they know their community. They know behind that house, it's this. And they just know, and we go and dig a test pit, and they're right. They usually know exactly how deep the clay is and these sorts of things. So we would come by, do initially the test pits. Sometimes the percolation tests are done on site. Usually if you're buying your fill, you know, the perk tests are done by the gravel pits usually. They'll have that available for you. Or if you have a community gravel pit, if you run a couple of perk tests or bring them for the sieve test to a lab, then you'd have a good idea of what your fill is. And then you would base your design on the percolation rate of the soil, right? You don't want clay because it doesn't allow the wastewater to travel through it to be treated properly. But you don't want really big boulders because it's just going to shoot right through that into the groundwater. We will also ensure separation distances. So he gave a really nice visual of the old pipe that was just full of roots. Totally not an effective run on your septic system. If it's going to be full of roots or toys or things like that, then it's not going to treat the water, and you're going to have water that has bacteria go down into the groundwater or potentially into the surface water. So we also would look at the application, make recommendations before the installation even happens. We would work with the community and the contractor, provide a report to the chief and council. We also would inspect each individual system at your request, and we would do the inspection and base it on the requirements of the Ontario Building Code. So we would ensure that things are level and that you have your slopes appropriate. Those sorts of things, details we would have a look at. And we want to observe the components. So we wouldn't want to go when the whole field's covered and you're like, okay, I'm done, can you do the inspection? Because we can't verify any things under the dirt. So we always ask that you leave like the header open, for example, in the beginning of the runs and then the end of the run. And that way we're able to use our levels and get out and our laser levels and determine, okay, is it level like it's supposed to be for this type of trench or the chamber, or does it have its slope that it's supposed to if you're using pipe? So we will look at all of those things, keep it all open for us. I know it's difficult sometimes because, you know, the guy with the backhoe is only here for 2 days and then they're moving on. They have other projects. So we'll do our best to be there. If not, take photos, gather as much information as you can, and this protects your community as well, right? You want to ensure the work being done is done properly so that you don't have to go back and redo it all over again. And then the final inspection, final inspection would be you could have us come back after the field's been sodded or seeded, because again, when we come and do that final inspection with the open components, the final recommendation is provide the occupants some details on how to maintain their system, and it would also be ensuring that you seed and sod it. Why do we want to do that? Why should we cover it with grass? I need someone in the back, because I've been given too many prizes up front here. Why do we need to seed and sod our septic fields? Pardon? Who's that? Who said erosion? Was that you over here? Was it one of you guys? No? Nobody wants a video to take back to the community? Here, you guys can share it. You can fight over it. So yeah, we want to prevent erosion of the field, because if we don't, the water's going to come and wash all away the beautiful work and fill that you just paid for and had brought into the backyard and had it all finished off nicely. So if you don't do that, you're just going to have the field kind of wash away, and it'll impact the runs, and then you don't have adequate treatment essentially. So you always want to try to follow through and get it covered and grassed as soon as possible. So this here, we know that all the water exits the home, it goes through the pipe, and it leads to that buried tank. The videos I like to play because it's a lot quicker sort of education as to how the tank works. So we know the waste flows to the first compartment, the heavy solids all settle to the bottom. You have your fats, oils, and grease kind of float along the top, and then as things start to fill up, your baffles and screens keep that scum layer. It starts to move to the second compartment where the finer particles settle, and then the organic materials break down nicely by those billions of bacteria having a party in there. And we saw the newer systems after 2006, you have to have the effluent filter. So I've seen some positive comments about effluent filters and some negative comments about effluent filters. Some communities don't want to use them because they get clogged up really quickly. And then some communities think they're awesome. So something that actually I was talking to someone in the room about the other day was with the agreements with the occupants in the home, every community manages housing differently. You know, whether they're tenants, whether they're, it's their home. I mean, every community manages this differently. Septic systems is something you want to consider in your agreement. You got to lay out who's responsible for what. So if there's an effluent filter that needs to be checked every year, are you going to have your maintenance guys every year do the whole community check all the filters? Or are you leaving that to the occupant? So those are things you really want to consider to kind of lay out at the get-go. Otherwise, people just assume maybe someone else is going to do it. Same with pumping. Have a nice schedule. Have a schedule of when you're bringing your tanker. Some communities own their own trucks. Some communities bring people in. So have a nice schedule and try to get everybody pumped around the same time to save money, to ensure that they're all done. But again, is it the responsibility of the housing department or is it the responsibility of the occupant? So these are things that save you guys a lot of hassle at the end. Instead of having an overflowing tank and then a lot of money is going to have to be paid to fix it. So simple maintenance discussions that can be had. And so we saw the video. This is right out of these booklets that I have here again, the nice visual of our septic tanks with our effluent filters. And even though the Ontario Building Code is not enforceable, it's certainly, we to the letter try to recommend that you follow the building code requirements. So we know that out of the tank, it goes into the leaching beds, which are made up of usually perforated polyvinyl chloride, but I've seen all kinds of new technologies. I don't even see, in the last, well, I haven't been in the field for a few years, but my last 2 years in the field, I think all I saw were chamber systems and EcoFlow systems. Does anyone here still do pipe and stone? It works great. It just depends what you have in your community. You really have to look, what is our needs? What's the cost? Where are we located? Who's doing it? And most importantly, what is the soil like? How far down is the groundwater? What do we have to bring in and import? You always need your 3 feet of clean, good fill under the bottom of your trench, right? So are you having to import that? Does it cost more? Does it cost more to go with the chamber system versus the PVC and the rock? So it depends. You really have to look at all those factors. So we know that the effluent flows into the bed by gravity or by a pump. Pumps can be great when they work. I see lots of failures with pumps. Lots of people just, I'm going to unplug this because it's drawing power and I don't really know what it is. So it's education again. Maybe labeling the pump cord, some pump cords in homes, saying this cannot be unplugged. People just don't know, and they do it, without knowing. Simple sort of education can prevent problems there. And we know that with the typical pipe and stone beds, the soil below the soil in the trench is the thing that actually treats the contaminants. So do not really focus on having good fill, and make sure that when you're buying it, they're giving you something to prove that they've done the perk rates on it. Because those 3 feet is everything between clean wastewater coming out or contaminated groundwater and drinking water. You really need that fill to be appropriate to treat the water. So interestingly enough, the soil under that stone in a system that works will remove 99% of the E. coli. And not all E. coli are bad and cause disease and death, but a lot of them are, and the one that we hear about with drinking water and sewage is the 0157H7, and that it can kill people. So again, leaching beds, they all have all sorts of different names, depending on people's history and their experience, what they call them, but they're all the same thing. It's just a different way of talking about it. There are different types of filter beds that are a little different than a traditional trench system, and those are really detailed in the code, and I think Phil will talk about that this afternoon. Community systems, I'm quickly going to go through. Our role in community systems has changed, and I'm sure anyone with a lagoon knows that. Because we used to provide what? What did we try to always do for communities? I know there's a community in the room that, for sure, I used to do effluent sampling. So we, as EHOs, would always try to effluent sample for the community if we could, just to help them when it came time to release their lagoon, for example, to ensure that the water met the requirements of the federal guidelines, which were, I think, developed before I was born. But they're new now, so that's good. But we used to provide those services, and unfortunately now we've never been funded for that, and now we're very sort of under the watch that any dollars that we spend have to specifically be tied to that framework I show you. So unfortunately, we can't do that monitoring anymore. We can help you. We can help you find, recommend a few labs maybe to talk to. But I have a slide near the end about Environment Canada has new regulations for wastewater systems, and First Nations are included under that. So they are your kind of go-to resource for those requirements now. So if you don't have a contact for them, I do. Your environmental health officers do. There's 2 people that we are given names, phone numbers, emails for. You should have seen stuff come to your communities over the last few years. We were told that they did notify communities of the changes, and I've been trying to work with them. So community systems, again, they take all of the wastewater from individual residences, transport it to a facility to be just treated and disposed of. I've only seen lagoons because I haven't been to every community, but there are communities that have rotating biological contactors. Some communities may have like a haul system. I wouldn't say that's the best way to go, but I'm sure that it exists somewhere in Ontario. So they would have a holding tank, and then every so often the truck would go around and pump everybody and bring it. So I see a couple nods. Probably not ideal, but it's you got to work with what you have. So we would inspect the plant if there's a public health concern. So again, we do it at the request. Usually we get involved in an emergency. There's a lift station overflowing and there's a river run into the lake full of raw poo. That's when we're involved, usually. So don't be shy. If you have an emergency, you have a situation where we can maybe advocate for you, get on the phone call, get on the teleconference with the other stakeholders and try to get this problem especially resolved to prevent contamination of drinking water. We are not engineers, like I'm not an engineer, so I'm not going to come in and be like, you're not operating that properly. Unless it's so obvious to me, like a failed pump, I'm definitely not your go-to for that. But you have your technical advisors that have engineers that would be able to sort of guide you through that. And I think the biggest thing is having the manuals and the information at your fingertips, which a lot of communities have like things get lost over the years, people change, jobs, positions change. So trying to support your staff to have all the material they need, the training they need to operate. So we do, again, provide advice, guidance, recommendations, and we will review plans. So this is a new guideline that we were provided. It's actually for the environmental health officer, and it's a guideline for us and our public health engineer on how to help the community when it comes to either upgrading or a new facility. And again, like I said, everything's tied to this framework. All 8 programs, if this book doesn't have it in there, we have to be careful sort of in are we able to provide a service or not? We always try to help the community in any way we can. So the guide is step by step. It tells us how to review it from a public health perspective. So our engineer doesn't look at it from an engineering perspective saying, well, this should be there and that should be there. She looks at it and says, well, I don't like this maybe because this can cause contamination of this. So she's really not looking at it from a money sense or operation sense, but more public health. So it's nice to get that extra sort of opinion to the community so that they can kind of look at, do we want to change this or adjust this? The elements that we consider are roles and responsibilities, process, procedure, and documentation. So an example of things that we would look at, the location of the outfall, so where the water's coming out, the sludge disposal, where's it being dumped, where's it being used, proximity to other uses, site security, so you don't want the lagoon to be open to teenagers, you know, out, somebody gets hurt, somebody falls in, that sort of thing, so site access, and also source water protection. So we would, and again, it's at your request, so unfortunately, we don't always know when there's big infrastructure projects happening in a community. Sometimes, you know, you miss being on a notice, or you know, you don't know what's going on, or funding comes up quickly, things happen. So if you're in these processes and you want our involvement, just let us know. Feasibility, pre-design, and design stages. Like I said, it's the environmental health officer because they have the relationship with the community, a bit of the history, and you also have our engineer who's in our headquarters office, so Southern Ontario, and she's more than willing to kind of help out with projects. So we look at public health mainly. We ensure the systems minimize adverse impacts on all water use. So recreational water use, maybe you have an area where you're going to be building homes or camps. And these are the sort of details that we look at when doing the review. This is the engineer does this. I don't do this. I don't look at the drawings and say, well, this line meets that line. And no, we have an expert that looks at these sorts of things. For example, they'd look at the vertical or horizontal separation between sewer and the water lines. So they have to be, one has to be over the other, and they have to be so far apart. Overflow discharge alarm mechanism. So if there's a failure, is there some sort of alarm to let the operator or the community know? Effluent discharge, you know, we would look at, is it going to impact other water usage? What is the receiving water body? Maybe there should be some sampling done before the system's going so that you know the baseline, like was it already contaminated because, you know, this company up there was doing this type of work. So you always want baseline information so that you know it's not your system causing the problem, for example, in a lake or a body of water. And then I talked about like fencing and signage to prevent injury. So these are kind of the documents that they would look at. So usually it's the engineering drawings, all the studies, those would be provided to our engineers to have a thorough review of. I talked about Environment Canada as of January 2013. This regulation is coming in, I think it's over like 30 years. I could be off by a few years, but it's a very long period of time. They're slowly bringing in each aspect of these requirements under their regulations. So I think that initially, and correct me if I'm wrong, but they just wanted communities to register with them and sort of fill out some information about their systems. Has anyone done it? Registered with Environment Canada? Okay. So again, if you want contact information, just let me know and I'll get that to you. Environment Canada has been communicating, they've told us they're communicating this with the communities, that they've been sending letters, and I'm hoping that they have, and that communities are receiving the information they need. This is just an example inspection report. Very rarely do we actually inspect the plants. It's usually in response to some type of emergency. And definitely your technical people would be way more equipped to do the technical aspects. We just look at, again, sanitation, hygiene, storage of chemicals. Public education is the final component. So I talked about each of our programs has inspection, training, and education. So we did everything else except public education. So we have all kinds of resources that we try to provide the communities. Like I said, we advocate for more culturally appropriate stuff, so I hope to see some stuff come down the line. And we can help you by getting these for you or giving you the contact information. We also always try to advocate for the occupational health and safety of you and your workers. If we see something that's dangerous, I'm going to let somebody know, because I want that person to go home to their kids. So again, we're not Labour Canada, but we will try to give you any information we can to protect your people. Education of workers, instruction, training, supervision, assessment of the risk. So again, when you're doing your emergency plans, know the risk before you send your people in. Exposure to sewage should be eliminated or minimized. Can't always happen, but use any sorts of things, that engineering controls that you can to sort of reduce your risk. And then providing first aid kits, also having personal protective equipment, proper wash-up areas. You know, my husband comes home and I don't even want him coming in the house with his work gear on, right? So always try to have that available for your staff, an area that they can take everything off and put clean clothes on. If you're working in a contaminated wastewater plant or tearing down an old house, you're covered in fibers and things that you can't see with the naked eye. Take it all off and put clean clothes on before you walk in the house. Try to avoid contaminating your own house with things that you're exposed to at work. Simple sort of steps. So again, these sorts of kits should be available in the event of emergencies or the event that you're doing maintenance. A lot of preparation kind of needed. We can help work with you to develop these sorts of things and advance your emergency response plans if you want us at the table. So it's a lot of information in the hour. And thank you all for coming today. Does anyone have any questions? Or if you have something you want to talk to me about, feel free to come see me today or call me at any other time. Even if I'm not from your area, I'll certainly help you and refer you to the right person. I know there's lots of changes, and it's been quite overwhelming, I think, with water and wastewater lately. Sure. Yeah. Well, that Ontario Rural Wastewater Centre, they're kind of Ontario's, you know, they're kind of the most advanced. They have the most research. They're very well versed in that, and everything I've read says don't use them. They're not beneficial and they cost money. Yeah. If people are using their systems properly, like not putting down, you know, food waste and things they're not supposed to, watching water conservation and maintaining the system, you should never need that stuff. Yeah. Well, thanks everyone. I bet you're hungry. It's lunchtime, eh? Have a safe trip home tonight.
On behalf of the
I have a copy of the presentation and some of the Septic Smart stuff if you want to help yourself up here.
Just on behalf of the working group, we'd like to thank Amy for her presentation. And a couple of housekeeping notes. Please fill out your survey on the tables, and there might be someone at the back to punch your cards. If not, you can come see me. I'll stand at the back. Lunch should be served around 12:15, and the next session start at 1:15. Thanks.